Welcome back to Civilnet. I'm your host, Patrick, and I'm honored to be joined today by Canadian Conservative Senator Leo Housakos. Senator Housakos, thank you.
Patrick, thank you for having me on your show.
Look, I have to say, I'm going to come right out the bat swinging here. As a Canadian Armenian living in Armenia, Canada's absence in the last, let's say, 3 years of crises in Armenia has been very much noted. It just feels like we've kind of been betrayed, that Canada has professed itself as a moral superpower as opposed to our cousins to the south of us who are a military and commercial superpower. If we're the moral superpower, I mean, where's Canada on the world stage? What's going on? We haven't heard from them when it comes to the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, the assault on Armenia's borders.
Well, straight question. I'll give you a straight answer. As your viewers might or might not know, I'm a senator for the opposition Conservative Party. And I totally agree with you. Since 2015, the Trudeau government that has come into power with such hope and aspirations, promising to make sure that Canada, and I quote the Prime Minister in 2015, the world needs more Canada and Canada's back. Well, Canada hasn't been back, as you appropriately point out. It's been absent, highly absent. And you're also right that we have had a long tradition of value-based foreign policy. And we've traded that down the river, and we've traded it down the river not for policy of realpolitik, as other nations do. At the end of the day, we know that there are other democracies that have chosen to put forward their foreign policy based on various economic interests. In the case of Canada, we are doing neither that nor our value-based traditional foreign policy of peacekeepers and supporters of of freedom and democracy and human rights. It's been sold down the river for navel-gazing, empty promises. Our foreign policy is a little bit indicative of our domestic policy as well. We're like a ship without a rudder right now.
Yeah, what hurts the most is that there was so much after Armenia's revolution, democratization in 2018. Canada was one of the first countries to show up, and the Prime Minister of Armenia and the Canadian Prime Minister even developed a personal relationship. Right, the whole selfies and the matching colorful socks. We kind of felt this new era that, this tiny outpost in the middle of a sandwich between Europe and Asia is getting the attention of Canada due to shared, mutual values of democracy, and that was pretty much dashed when push came to shove. We found out just how alone we truly were. However, I will point out you called for sanctioning Azerbaijan in the Canadian Senate. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, first I'll go back to your first point. Prime Minister Trudeau is very good at raising expectations, and he does it for his own political expediency. He knows there's various diasporas in Canada. We're a very diverse nation. Canada, at the end of the day, is a nation of various people from all across the world. So for his own political expediency, he'll meet leaders around the world. Doesn't matter if it's in Armenia, Greece, other countries, and he creates this false sense of partnership, but he never follows through with anything that's concrete. And it's unfortunate. And you're right. The most disappointed Armenians are not in Armenia. The most disappointed Armenians vis-a-vis Canadian policy in Armenia are Canadians of Armenian descent. They're hurt. They're disappointed. The tragedy, the ethnic cleansing that has happened in what people call Nagorno-Karabakh, which is Artsakh. That's the historical fact and reality. And we have to get back to a world where we call things what they are, rather constantly making up these make-believe names in order, make-believe names, not make-believe names, in order to satisfy all kinds of various agendas. Now, to your question, yeah, I had a motion, a position which I articulate on a daily basis, that I think it's absolutely abhorrent that the Canadian government and other Western democracies have not put into place targeted sanctions against Azerbaijan after the aggression that they carried out throughout 2020 in the last 3 years, culminating to the expelling of 120,000 Armenian people from their indigenous lands that they've been there for centuries. And the fact that we haven't put into place targeted sanctions, the fact that we haven't used some of the instruments that we have at our disposal to hold officials of the Azeri government to account, like the Magnitsky Act, for example. It's a testament to the weakness of our Canadian government and our unwillingness to be on the right side of history.
Do you think there's any chance in the near or distant future, whether under this current government or let's say if the Conservative were to come to power, that there would be some sanctions, or is there something preventing it that we're not being told?
Well, the current government says sanctions are under consideration. Look, to be fair, they finally, after years of pressure from the opposition and the Canadian Armenian community, have opened an embassy in Yerevan. It's fantastic. It's been a long time coming. Now, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was here recently opening up the embassy, says that sanctions are under consideration on the table. If the Trudeau government is serious about defending human rights and international rule of law, those sanctions will be applied as soon as possible. Now, in terms of future governments, well, hopefully a future Conservative government will certainly put those sanctions into place and take more steps as well. But we don't know if there's an election coming in a year or 2 years. So.
You were recently awarded the Order of Friendship of Armenia. So first of all, congratulations.
Thank you. It's an honor. It's humbling. Those of us that are engaged in politics, Patrick, we very rarely get rewarded or honored, but it is a humbling honor. And I have to say this, that really the recognition and the respect is owed to all of those who came before us. The reason why I'm such a strong advocate for Armenian causes is because it's the right thing to do. It's a people over the last century and many centuries that have suffered at the hands of tyranny, at the hands of people that want to silence freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And I think it's an obligation I have, if you believe in those values, to stand up for the right things.
Well, Armenia is a bastion of liberty in a sea of tyranny.
Well, that is, I keep saying, I had some wonderful meetings, of course, with the President of the Armenian Republic and the Prime Minister, and I keep saying that we Canadians, and that includes you, before you're a former Canadian, but once born in Canada, always Canadian.
I'm still a Canadian citizen.
There you go.
That hasn't changed.
There you go. I always say God's given us four wonderful elements: the three oceans that we're surrounded by, and a border with the United States of America. Unfortunately for Armenia, they've been given four elements. They're bordering Russia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Iran. When we Canadians think of that possibility or prospect or necessity of finding a way to be a democratic, free state, a country that respects freedom and rule of law and international human rights, in that type of neighborhood, I think it compels us democratic states out in the Western world to start doing more to defend this small democracy. We stand up all the time to defend Israel in the name of democracy and freedom in the Middle East, and we should. But Armenia also deserves to be respected and supported, and this young fledgling democracy nurtured. And at the end of the day, I've said it before and I'll say it again, just because Armenia doesn't have oil and gas, it doesn't make their democracy any less worthy. And just because a regime like Azerbaijan has oil and gas, doesn't mean because of that, in our failures as Western democracies to plan ahead and secure energy security, it doesn't make it right, some of the positions and some of the soft diplomacy and fence sitting that Western democracies have been engaged in.
So where would you like to see Canadian and Armenian bilateral relations go? In an ideal world, what would that look like for you?
Well, it would look like, number one, standing up for Armenia before tragedies happen. We have always run to provide aid to Armenia after we had 120,000 Armenians expelled from their homeland. We always put out declarations after the Azerbaijan government conducts aggressive military action in Nagorno-Karabakh. We need to start supporting Armenia in advance, drawing a line in the sand and letting all your neighbors, meaning the Armenian neighbors, know that this democracy will be defended by Canadians with financial aid, military support, increased diplomacy, engagement, and all of those things that need to be done. Furthermore, Canada can play a role in the democratic West in convincing our allies that we need to align ourselves and transform ourselves from petty peddlers when it comes to foreign policy and transform ourselves into a value-based foreign policy.
Can you tell us what are some of the vectors in which Canada can support Armenia militarily? You mentioned militarily. That's, I'm sure, the term that all of our viewers are the most interested in right now. What can we do to defend ourselves better? Is there any kind of red tape that's preventing something like that from happening?
Well, it's a political will. I'm not saying to provide guns and bullets and call for war. That's not the Canadian way. We are a middle power. We always call for peace. We believe in soft diplomacy, but we need to start understanding that soft diplomacy doesn't work all the time. But Canada, what we can do is provide auxiliary technology and supplemental technology, which we're world leaders in, communication, radar, and so on and so forth, that can help the Armenians in their defense operation. I'll give a very simple example, and it's a shameful example for all of us Canadians. When Prime Minister Trudeau decided to lift an embargo that Canada had to sell LR3 technology to Turkey. It happened in 2020. After a phone call, we see the sequence. In April of 2020, Prime Minister Trudeau was on a phone call with Erdogan, and a few weeks later, the LR3 Harris Corporation is green-lighted to sell technology to the Turkish government that was mounted on Turkish drones, that was passed on to the Azeri government during the war against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh and Artsakh in Armenia. And at the end of the day, I say it, and I know it hurts Trudeau liberals back home, but Prime Minister Trudeau has Armenian blood on his hands when he took that decision. That decision killed men, women, and children in Artsakh, Armenian people. And when he signed off on that, he helped contribute in turning Nagorno-Karabakh today into an empty shell of what used to be Armenian people, Armenian civilization. It's shameful for Canadians. It's unacceptable. And this is an example where these are the kind of things we could be helping Armenia with rather than Turkey, a rogue country. Even though it's a NATO ally, we see how egregious the behavior of the Erdogan regime is towards NATO allies.
Bullying Greece.
Bullying
last
Greece,
couple of years.
bullying. Every single region of the world has experienced bullying from this NATO ally. Yet we in the West, we accept it.
Tell us, Canada recently announced that they're going to be providing 2 peacekeepers to observers to the EU observation mission in Armenia. They're the only non-European country to do so. Tell us what's behind this decision. What's in it for Canada?
I'm hoping, the way I interpret this decision is that I'm hoping that the Trudeau government and Minister Mélanie Joly are starting to find their way. We opened an embassy. Like I said, it's a good first step. We've provided some financial aid to the refugees that are coming out of Nagorno-Karabakh into Armenia. And I hope they come into Armenia, and the Armenian government, I see, is providing a safe haven for these people. We should be providing a lot more aid. $4 million is not enough, and I believe that's what has been concretely announced by the Mélanie Joly government. We need more. So I'm also I believe this announcement of Canada to participate in that EU mission is furthermore another step of the political engagement, parliamentary engagement between Canada and Armenia. Like I said, it's little baby steps. I'm optimistic. We have to be optimistic. I'm of Greek ethnic origin. You're Armenian. We've survived all these years under a lot of pressure and duress and attacks because of our resilience and our perseverance. So we need to be hopeful.
You were recently at the meeting of the OSCE in Armenia. Can you tell us a little bit about this? This is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe.
Yeah, like I said, I believe in diplomacy. I believe we have to support all these different forums, the OSCE, the United Nations. These are all organizations we have put into place, and we've put into place in order to create dialogue, diplomacy, but they have to be efficient and effective. The way things are going, we look at all the disruptions that we're having around the world and the essentially tragedies around the world, be it in the Middle East. We see it, of course, here in this neighborhood. We see the attack on democracy and human rights in Hong Kong and Taiwan. We have not seen the amount of disruption since probably the Second World War that we see right now, and the attack on democracy. So the OEC, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, should change its acronym to the OW, EC for that matter, Organization for War and Conflict in Europe and the world. It's failed, and we have to come to terms with the fact that it has failed, because soft diplomacy sometimes gives the impetus to tyrants, autocrats, oligarchs, bullies around the world, that democracies and free-loving people of the world are not ready to fight for freedom. We're not ready to defend it in a tangible way. So if you let a bully encroach on your territory a little bit, and all he hears back are words and empty declarations, they perceive that as a sign of weakness to take that inch that they've gained and go get a mile. So the message I sent to the OSCE this weekend is, first of all, we need to call aggressors aggressors and not allow aggressors, when they're acting in an aggressive manner, transform the debate to, oh, this is a conflict. And I'll use case in point, Armenia and Azerbaijan. This is not a conflict. The area that Azerbaijan was aggressive in, and they instigated the conflict, and at the end of the day, they were actual aggressors, and we see it when you're locking down corridors like Lashin corridor and you're preventing food, water, and medicine to go to people living in a region. It's because you're trying to suffocate them. So instead of the OSCE and the rest of the world calling this a conflict, we should have called it an attack, because this is what it is. So when these organizations don't call things what they are, they don't call out bullies, and they don't defend the side that's on democracy, freedom, rule of law, and human rights, then these democracies lose all their credibility. And we are right now at that point where the general public has lost faith in the UN, NATO, and the OSCE.
Senator, thank you so much. Really appreciate having you on. Thanks again for watching. This is Pat from Civilnet, and we'll speak to you very, very soon.